So, when we talk about the issues that divide us, we are talking about things that are most prevalent to American people about what they think the president should be responsible for in the next 4 years. What I want you to think about, in addition, is what things are most important to you as someone who's too young to vote, but who will still be living with the consequences of the decisions that that president makes past the next 4 years. And how, when we look at the polling data of what most registered voters say in the United States, how that squares with what you find the most valuable as a young person. So, a few key terms going forward. The first is partisan, which is aligning strongly with one side of an issue. So, being particularly partisan would mean that you are less likely to compromise, right? You are more devoted to your side or your viewpoint. Similarly, polarized, similar to its scientific definition, means that it is far apart from an opposing side or a different side. So, two sides of an issue that are polarized mean that they have a lot less in common. There's a lot of common ground, they are very far apart. Finally, a spectrum, when it comes to political ideology, is like many spectrums, right? It is effectively, you have 2 points. It is the line between them, a line being the shortest distance between 2 points. And of course, as we know from math class, on a line, there are infinite points. So you can keep zooming in to a line further and further and get more and more points on that line. So the spectrum is where everyone falls between 2 points, 2 different viewpoints. So the political spectrum is to kind of try to measure how people feel about what the government should do in theory. Now, you could think of this as terms of the entire world or just in terms of the United States. Either way, you have a spectrum that has, of course, infinite points along it. What I find most interesting about the political spectrum is that as you get farther to the extremes on either side, you actually start to see more and more similarities between the opposing ends. So, to the right wing, if you went to the far extreme, the totalitarian dictatorship that is right wing protects the individual and the property rights of people at the expense of many others, right? Whereas, say, a communist dictatorship on the other side would be all about distributing resources and controlling people's lives, but in a way to try to make things equal, right? So they're both dictatorships. They both actually have a lot in common, but kind of the central goal is what differentiates them. So it almost seems like the political spectrum would be represented by a horseshoe shape. So as you get to the extremes, they actually start to have more and more in common with each other and come back closer together. It's worth noting that compared to the rest of the world, the United States general political spectrum, so what we think of as most people fall into this bubble here in their beliefs in the United States, but compared to the rest of the world, which is this line, we all skew to the right. So in the United States, our more left-leaning party, the Democrats, would be considered more conservative or right-leaning compared to most of the rest of the democratic world. So different countries that have democracies. And our right-leaning party, the Republicans, would be kind of off the chart to the right. That is because in most other modern democracies, things like universal access to healthcare, to housing, to education, to enough food to eat are kind of considered basic human rights that are established, and even conservative people and conservative parties don't challenge that. Whereas here in the United States, even our left-leaning party, even our Democratic Party, does not make that the central focus or a big part of their platform. So as we know, Joe Biden does not support Medicare for all, right? Which it would be kind of a gimme in pretty much every other westernized democracy. So he would be considered further to the right if he was to go to, say, the UK. And the people that Donald Trump calls the extreme left or the far left, like Bernie Sanders or AOC, they are, of course, on the edge of our political spectrum, but in most other countries, they'd be considered pretty normally to the left. Bernie Sanders would be just like any other UK Labour Party member, which is kind of like their Democrats. And Joe Biden would actually be probably part of their conservatives. Donald Trump would be somewhere way out to the right, some fringe party, because they just don't go as far right as our spectrum does.